All right, good morning, everyone. Recording this at 8:30 a.m. Central Time on Thursday, October 12th, 2023. Let's get into updates as it relates to the ongoing war between Israel and Hamas. So the Israeli Defense Force put out an operational recap at 11:45 a.m. local on October 12th, saying that over 95 families have been notified that their loved ones have been taken hostage. Over 1,200 Israelis have been confirmed killed, and over 3,000 Israelis injured. A real quick note on that, just reading between the lines based off of some other estimates, 1,200 Israelis killed. It sounds like 186 of those were soldiers. And when you're looking at the 95 plus families that have been notified that their loved ones have been taken hostage, it sounds like at least 50 of those captives, according to Israel, are military personnel. The remainder, the bulk in each of those categories, appear to still be civilians. Continuing on with the operational recap, the IDF said over 5,000 rockets have been fired from Gaza. The Iron Dome has been very effective throughout history, but the volume that Hamas has thrown at that platform has just been overwhelming. Now, those are not all state-of-the-art rockets. That number is likely including things like small mortars, drones, some loitering munitions that we've seen Hamas put into use. So 5,000 projectiles, if you will, fired into Israeli territory. And then the IDF says they struck 2,687 targets. That is an increase of 400 over the last 24 hours, but that number is already old. Since the IDF put this statement out, there have been continued reports of just constant strikes all across Gaza. Now, the Palestinian Health Ministry, as of earlier today, says that 1,200 Palestinians have been killed, along with 5,339 wounded in Gaza due to the Israeli strikes. This is on top of, as mentioned yesterday, the estimated 1,500 Hamas terrorists that were killed on Israeli territory. And that cleanup is still ongoing. They're starting to show, never really stopped. Right out the gate, you could see some of this footage. The early footage was actually coming out from Hamas more than anything, showing what they were doing to Israeli civilians. And over the course of the past few days, as the IDF has moved in to clear and secure some of these villages near Gaza where Hamas infiltrated, they're bringing in reporters and showing the aftermath of some of this carnage. And it's brutal. It's apocalyptic. They butchered Israeli civilians, which there's always been a debate throughout history. The United States famously in World War II didn't want to show dead American soldiers to our civilians because they said it might hurt morale. And I think it's a valid ongoing debate. How do you show that kind of thing? Should you show that kind of thing? In this case, I think it's worthwhile. I wouldn't suggest searching for it. It's out there. I think it's worth documenting and showing what a terrorist organization like Hamas is capable of. The threat has to be taken seriously. Now, in that line of terrorism and terrorist groups, there were some Islamic State flags recovered from some of these areas where the Hamas terrorists were found and eliminated. And a couple notes on that. Hamas, obviously a very different organization than Islamic State. There might be some in Hamas that look up to Islamic State in a sense, as weird as that sounds, but it's not a two-way street. Islamic State, if you recall, some of their issues with the Taliban is they view the Taliban as lesser, right? They're not as pious as Islamic State in a lot of ways. That same sentiment holds towards Hamas. So much of Islamic State leadership looks down on Hamas as being apostates in a sense because of their close ties, because of Hamas's close ties with Shiite Iran. So they're not necessarily on the same page, if you will. However, there are Salafi jihadi elements inside of Gaza, not necessarily part of Hamas, but inside of Gaza. One of those, kind of considered the Islamic State offshoot in the region, is the Sheikh Omar Hadid Brigade. So we don't know if that organization played a part in these attacks. So it's not exactly clear if those flags were brought in by Islamic State militants, Islamic State sympathizers, or what it might be. But there is a degree of connection there, if you will. Now, there's still no Israeli offensive into Gaza, but according to the Israeli Defense Force, their troops are standing by, ready to go in, and will kick that off when the conditions are set. And setting the conditions, as of now, looks like significant aerial bombardment of Hamas targets all across Gaza. There was an article that came out earlier in the Jerusalem Post saying that Hamas is starting to lose control. Some of the Hamas leadership is losing control in the Gaza area. And what it really points to is that the volume and the intensity of the attacks is making it to where the leadership can't understand who's been killed, what groups have been taken out. The lines of communication already somewhat hampered just by the nature of where they're fighting has gotten even worse. This is exactly what you would expect Israel to want to do prior to kicking off any sort of ground attack. Now, the aerial campaign that we're seeing over Gaza right now is going to get a lot of mixed information, and it has throughout this conflict, like dating back years. And the reason for that is that there's a lot of targets struck inside of Gaza that can be presented as other things, usually because they are other things as well, right? An apartment building, you'll hear Hamas come out and say that Israel struck an apartment building full of civilians, and there was no military value to it. And to say it's complicated is the simplest way to put it. Hamas is a terrorist organization. They're not going to only work in military facilities. They're not going to clearly label their military facilities. They're going to one of the advantages of a terrorist organization is that they try to at least leverage the civilian population and hide amongst the civilian population. So many of these, call them headquarters, bomb-making facilities, rocket storage sites, whatever it might be, they're not in dedicated military locations because they can't be. Gaza is a bubble. Hamas is operating inside of a bubble, a terrorist organization operating in relatively limited terrain. All of their activities are going to be closely interconnected with the general public. It's the nature of the beast. Hopefully, Israel moving forward is doing their absolute best to differentiate civilians from military targets, but I can say definitively it is impossible that there will be no collateral damage simply based off the nature of how Hamas is intertwined into Gaza. Now, getting a little further into that, if you look at some of the pictures I'll share here of what Gaza is looking like right now after some of these strikes, it's going to be a nasty, nasty urban fight. You know, Hamas cannot be eradicated from the air. I think we've learned that in the United States. Al-Qaeda could not be eliminated from the air. The Taliban could not be eliminated from the air. Islamic State could not be eliminated from the air. At the end of the day, you have to have boots on the ground that go in and secure the territory. Now, what Israel's plans after that, after this operation, whether it takes weeks, months, or even years, looks like, is not exactly clear. But this is not something that can be won entirely by bombing Gaza. And when you look at some of these pictures of Gaza City and other parts right now, it's just going to be incredibly nasty. It's a already densely packed urban area, which makes urban combat is just incredibly fraught with danger at baseline. But when you look at the amount of rubble strewn across the streets, I mean, you can just see fighting positions everywhere. IEDs can be buried everywhere. It's going to be so incredibly hard for the IDF to advance through this area whenever that inevitably comes. It really, really does look like that is going to kick off here at some point. Now, while we're waiting for that ground offensive to take place, the siege has continued. So as mentioned by the Israeli defense minister a few days ago, no food, water, or medical supplies, nothing. A complete shutdown of anything into and out of Gaza, they say, until all hostages are returned. And a quick note on the hostages here real quick. A graphic came out from the State of Israel yesterday, October 11th, showing the murdered and missing foreign nationals that they've been able to identify so far. There's 36 different countries listed here, from China to Portugal, Panama, the United States, United Kingdom, Ukraine. It's a lot. The bad news here, if you will, is that being that we're 6 days in, anybody missing at this point is you have to assume that they are being held hostage by Hamas. There's IDF is still going through cleanup in portions of Israel, but you have to expect that people at this point would have been identified in hospitals if they were wounded. For the most part, there could be some that slipped through the cracks, and there still are bodies being identified. But in all likelihood, many of these that are considered missing as of today are being held by Hamas in Gaza. Now, back to the siege of Gaza. Al Jazeera is reporting that the only power plant in the area is shutting down due to lack of fuel. And Al Jazeera is going to be an interesting source here. They have developed and maintained ties with Hamas in terms of reporting. It's an outlet worth watching, an outlet worth consuming news from, but recognizing, just as you would from any source in this conflict or any others, you have to consider there may be some bias there in terms of what they're putting out. Now, there are some people coming out against this siege, not just in the Islamic community, which would be expected given the number of civilians in Gaza. We've talked about this before, but Hamas is different than the Palestinian people. There are civilians, innocent civilians, that do not support Hamas in Gaza, and they're going to fall victim to this siege. I mean, they were already living under horrible conditions. This is just going to make it exponentially worse when you add in the bombing campaign, of course. There have been people starting to come out against this siege, and Israel has said that they're going to announce the reason why they're cutting off things like water here in the near future. But it'll be interesting to see how long they keep this up. I would say right now, Israel is benefiting from widespread international support, right? Following the terrorist attacks, these brutal terrorist attacks on their territory, much of the world is in their corners, understandably so, saying, you got to do what you got to do, take care of this. But as this siege continues, if we start to hear stories about women and children and the elderly dying because of this siege, it has the potential to shift international public perception. So it'll be interesting to see how long this siege continues. The other side of it is totally understandable by the IDF, saying our adversaries, our enemies, the people that just did harm to our civilians are in this area. We're not going to let them have anything. Why would you want any chance for your enemies to be able to regroup and have any sort of aid at all, right? The siege makes sense in a military sense. Now, shifting over to external actors, Hezbollah fired another anti-tank missile into Israeli territory up north, supposedly wounded one Israeli soldier. The IDF response was a drone strike onto a Hezbollah outpost, but reports yesterday, it was kind of a confusing issue. There were reports of a large drone, loitering munition, maybe even aerial attack. There were reports of aerial infiltration into Israel that came across the Israeli the Israeli alert platform, if you will. Turns out to be a false alarm. Now, those false alarms have happened on this platforms before, but this was a big one, and it came at a time where everybody's worried, especially everybody in Israel is worried that something could kick off with Hezbollah to the north. But as of now, as we're recording, it looks like Hezbollah has still not yet entered the fight, and hopefully they don't. Additionally, news this morning came out that Israel appears to have struck targets in Syria at both the Damascus and Aleppo international airports. I haven't seen confirmation yet. Please add it in the comments below if I've missed this, but I haven't seen confirmation from Israel yet that they carried out that attack. It's Syria saying these are Israeli warplanes that carried out these strikes. The idea here supposedly is to stop or at least halt arms shipments into some of these Iranian-backed militias in Syria that could potentially conduct attacks into Israel from that direction. Now, on the one hand, this sounds like a drastic escalation, Israel striking into a sovereign territory. Unfortunately, just the nature of the beast, this is not a new occurrence. Israel has carried out a handful of strikes in Syria in recent years, and Syria is just a mess. Realistically, it's pretty permissive airspace. So, of course, Israel risks a plane being shot down when they end up over Syria. But again, this is on its nose or on its face. But again, on its face, this is not really as much of an escalation as it might appear at first glance. Now, there continue to be mixed reports on Iranian involvement. And this is something I think, just personal opinion, we have to be very, very careful how we proceed here. I would say that they 100% do have culpability just based off their historic ties. The majority of the funding, especially for the militant portion of the Hamas organization, comes from Iran. You cannot dissociate that. So the training, the logistics, the infrastructure for Hamas is Iran. But on that note, National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby said that while Iran had clearly supported Hamas and was broadly complicit, the U.S. did not have any direct evidence that they were behind the attack. So on the one hand, we've got that kind of urging caution. Iran has some role to play here. Don't know that they necessarily directed it. Senator Lindsey Graham kind of came out on the other side saying that he was confident that Tehran was involved in carrying out and executing the attack, arguing that for every Israeli or American hostage executed by Hamas, we should take down an Iranian oil refinery. I just feel like we have to be really careful here and not overreact. This terrorist attack was bad enough. Let's make sure we keep the focus on the organization that committed these horrific acts, Hamas. And Israel is focused on that. They're going after Hamas, trying to, it looks like, completely eradicate them. It makes me nervous when that fight is still ongoing and we start pointing fingers in other directions and calling for things like strikes on other countries when it doesn't seem quite clear yet just how much of a role they played. I mean, look, the Iranian regime is no friend to the United States or Israel. So this isn't trying to excuse their behavior or let them off the hook in any way. It's just, this reminds me so much of the supposed 9/11 links to Saddam and Iraq before the United States invaded in 2003 that just ended up not really being there. So maybe the orders did come directly from Iran. Maybe they played a major role in coordinating and facilitating this attack. We have to be careful. Let's wait for that information to come out. But that's all I got for now. Of course, if interested, check out the national security sit reps I put out on Substack. Link is in the description below. It's 7 to 10 of the top national security stories each week, along with some podcast recommendations. But thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.